Okay, so good afternoon. We'll go live in, well, I think we're live now, so we'll start in just a second. Okay, so good afternoon. It is February 14th. It looks like our connection is good. I apologize for last night where it looked like our connection was just terrible. But I'm still fighting a little bit of this sinus thing, so if you see me drinking a little too much, I apologize. For some reason, it just won't go away. But good to have you here. An interesting day today because, being in the media, obviously very limited media in Brantford along the shoreline, and while we're trying to grow that, hearing about Rush Limbaugh dying today, obviously he was sick, and we knew that he wasn't going to last much longer, but it was an interesting study for the last 45 minutes or an hour, and then this earlier today when I was doing more research on him, on the impact that he had and what he meant to media, the fairness doctrine, the growth of what we see today. And it's really impressive. And so, there's so much of his ideology that I disagree with. There's things that he said that were ridiculous. We'll talk about some of those things today. But the real question is, what was the impact that he had on today's politics? Not just the politics that got here. He had massive impact on elections, massive impact on Bush getting in office, huge impact on the Clinton administration, just a massive following all over the country. But that legacy, I think, lasts so much longer. And I think it started this rise of entertainment really being where people were getting news from. And I think even people like Jon Stewart and The Daily Show owe a lot to what Rush Limbaugh started, for good or for bad. We'll judge that later. But it is unbelievably impactful when you see what he did and the impact that he had. Granted, some of the things he did, and we can talk about this, does some of the absurdities, the ugliness that he brought to the table, does that define him? Obviously, it'll define him from the left. From the right, they'll look at it as entertainment, and they agreed with him. But does that impact his legacy? And if we take away the ugliness, if we take away the insults and a lot of the racist stuff he said, and by the way, there's no question, this is a fact. He said things that were horrific. What was left? Was there any substance there? And do we have the equal thing happening on the left? I mean, I'm going to go over just some of the quotes from this person. We'll talk about the Sandra Fluke thing a little bit. We'll talk about some of the Obama quotes. But, I pulled up earlier, so I'm going to get to this in a second. Let me see here. The quotes from Rush Limbaugh that he made. I'm going to read some of these. Here's a quote. Have you ever noticed how all composite pictures of wanted criminals resemble Jesse Jackson? That's racist. It's extremely racist. Look, let me put it to you this way. The NFL is all too often looks like a game between the Bloods and the Crips without any weapons. There, I said it. Holy crap. The NAACP, should have riot rehearsal. They should get liquor store and practice robberies. About black people, they're 12% of the population. Who the hell cares? To a African-American caller, take that bone out of your nose and call me back. These things are ridiculous and awful. And so the media today has a significant problem where, when someone passes away, you have this, you see them in this positive light, even if it's just for a short amount of time. But the media is also well aware of the impact he had on the media industry. At the same time, he did awful things and said awful things, despite getting the presidential medal just last year. And so everyone in the media, and I've talked to a few people earlier today, this is the question. How do you view this person? He changed the media landscape. He took conservative values, made them entertaining, made them funny, grew an audience, and then became way over the top. That's happening on the left as well, where just getting your news has morphed into we get our news from entertainers. We get our news from people who are funny or comical. Jon Stewart started this. And I'm going to tell you this, Jon Stewart many, many times is inaccurate. There were countless times watching Jon Stewart, he would crack a joke about Republicans. They were always about Republicans. And you got to a point you said, wait, that wasn't true. He got to his punchline, it was funny, and all the kids in the audience were laughing, but it really wasn't true. Rush Limbaugh started that way and then went full nasty. And the question is, how has that impacted our political discourse now? Now, there were times that he actually apologized for things. I'm sorry, somebody just posted you cannot hear or watch. Can everybody hear me? Just confirm that it can be heard. If somebody can comment, I'd appreciate it. If not, I'll restart this again. I don't know why this keeps happening. Oh, we can hear. Okay. All right. So I don't know how to solve this problem. Can you go live on Apple? Somebody said, can you watch Told to Watch app? Told to watch. I don't know what that means. Okay. Thank you very much. You can see in here. But so this legacy of Rush Limbaugh is a very, very complicated legacy from a standpoint of someone who reached unbelievable heights, unbelievable levels of success. On a broader picture, wow, what an amazing, I mean, he was on 600 stations, I think, something around the country, or more than that. Millions of Americans listened to him. And he found a voice and gave a voice to many conservatives that really didn't have a voice before then. You know, not for nothing. We talk about now the media being liberal. Yes, the media does skew liberal. There's no question. The kids in journalism school today are left. And they go into that industry and they stay left. And they lean left. There's no question about that. When you have people writing about topics they've never lived before, like I took some journalism classes. I know there's not geniuses in those classes. There's some that are great. In order to write about things like economics or finance or even politics, you have to live it a little bit. You have to have some inside information. You have to understand the real impacts of it. If you go from school to a newspaper or to a news site and you're covering it happening, you've never lived it, you're never going to get a good feel for that. And so your ideology doesn't necessarily change until what? You start trying to buy a house or have kids and start paying taxes and then real life starts to set in. But those young people coming up, and then when real life starts to set in, you leave that journalism job because there's no money in journalism to go somewhere else. So all the journalists and the people leading the media are typically young people looking to make a name for themselves, and they lean left. The media has always leaned left. That's not new. And Rush gave a voice to conservatives. They went through radio stations and heard a voice, was saying things that they agreed with, and he was entertaining. The question is, what do you do when you have that audience? And I've asked this question before on this podcast, and I have said to myself, I want to be the moderate Rush Limbaugh. I'd like to have that following and be on 600 stations or 1,000 stations or whatever, believing that there are moderates that want to listen. Now, I'm not as funny and entertaining as Rush Limbaugh ever was. I never will be. But what if he was? What if he was a voice of reason instead of the racist stuff that we heard from him? What kind of potential did he have to really make a positive difference? Instead of, he gave a voice to some and then went over the top and over the top and over. He impacted elections. But we just read a list of things that he said that were disgusting. Like no one should ever get away with. And not only did he get away with them, he made more money and became more popular. Did he speak to people at that point, or did he create that audience? There was a group of people called, I believe, Ditto Heads, his supporters. Ditto as in, yes, we agree. Groups of people that agreed with everything he said. That becomes a cult. And when that cult is spewing hate and racist and often disgusting things and passing it off as funny, are there any repercussions for that? Should there be? And I don't mean from a station saying you're off the air, or from, but from a society saying we're not going to listen to that. Or is it still just funny? And that's the question I have pondered probably the last few hours today of the legacy of Rush Limbaugh. This guy starts family of lawyers, starts on a radio station, goes to New York, gets picked up, he's all over the planet, is a voice for many people who felt they didn't have a voice. And then he becomes this greater-than-life figure who has said and done really, truly awful things, spread things that were blatantly false, incredibly false. And for many people, he was their news source. He was entertainment. He never hid the fact that he was entertainment, but for many people, he was their news source. On the left, for many people, their news source was Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart wasn't racist. He didn't say half the things Rush Limbaugh did, but much of what he said was untrue, or took incredibly complicated matters and narrowed it down to a joke. And when we take a very complicated matter and try to narrow it down to a joke you can fit on a bumper sticker, we're helping to encourage ignorance. We're not encouraging research and studying and finding out both sides of an issue. And that's where the concept of the fairness doctrine comes in, where before Reagan, the FCC had this concept of equal time. Not exactly equal time. It didn't mean, you had to have a left view and a right view in equal time on the air. But it meant that if you were going to cover news, one, that certain stations had to cover news. So it mandated that certain public interest categories existed on channels that were given approval to broadcast. But it also mandated that channels give at least some time to opposite viewpoints. It couldn't just spew one view. It had to have, all right, if you felt this way about immigration, here's how the other side feels. And you can spend 70% of your time on one view and 30% on the other, but at least you had to have that. And there was this question of, is free speech impacted there? And in the late 80s, there was a push to rescind this. The FCC rescinded this under concerns of free speech. There was a push by Democrats and I believe some Republicans to try to even codify that into law, and Reagan would not do it. So you lost that doctrine. You lost this idea that people presenting news or talking about political topics or things of public interest had to present more than one side of an issue. And so then you had a free-for-all. And you can have channels and stations, and maybe this is covered under free speech, maybe it's not. The idea that it's not can be looked at from the standpoint of these people are giving specific permission to have access to airwaves. So, the FCC approves channels for air. But this idea that these stations no longer had to do that, no longer had to make sure both sides were aired or shown or at least delivered or given as an option to people. And once you have that, you had the rise of MSNBC and you had the rise of Fox News. And it may have been a few years before these really caught on, but it was radio that started this, where you could jump in your car. And if it was a person that was right-wing just talking about politics, no one would listen to them. He had to be right-wing and entertaining. He had to tell jokes. He had to make sure people wanted to laugh and wanted to come back to his show all the time. And there were groups of people from the left that were after him constantly. They went after Sandra Fluke was one of those, a good example, where left groups went after him for his ridiculous comments. Sandra Fluke was a Georgetown law student who was asked by the Democrats to speak about contraception. And she gave a fairly innocuous speech in Congress about other people she went to school with and some issues they had getting contraception, getting covered under healthcare laws. And he basically called her a slut and a whore. And she was an activist, but she had done nothing wrong. She wasn't overly active, necessarily politically in Washington. She fought for women's rights at Georgetown. And so she testified in a hearing. And I remember that it was a documentary about it, but all of the people in that hearing who were testifying were males and mostly religious figures. And Sandra Fluke was the female who wasn't a religious figure. And Democrats wanted her. And whatever happened, she gave her testimony about other people she went to school with, and Rush Limbaugh had at her and called her every name in the book. Now, eventually he apologized about that. But he apologized after other left-leaning groups went after his advertisers. This may have been the early part of cancel culture. This is the kind of question that we face with cancel culture, right? So they said, okay, listen, this guy is saying these awful things about this student. You shouldn't advertise. And some advertisers said, okay, we shouldn't do it. Should we be doing that? Does that impact free speech? If we say to an advertiser, you shouldn't advertise on this podcast or MSNBC or Fox News because of what somebody you're unrelated to said in their show, is that society rebelling against free speech? I think so. I would never partake in that. I didn't agree with when Don Imus did it. When Don Imus said about the Rutgers basketball team, remember this years and years ago, Don Imus was like one of the top radio programs in the morning. And he said about the Rutgers basketball team, I believe the quote was, "Those are some nappy-headed hoes." That was his quote. And then it was nonsense. It was a stupid statement to say, disgusting in every way, no question. But he was kind of known for that. And the advertisers fought back, and people went to the advertisers, and he got fired. Now, he got another job and did just fine. But that's that cancel culture. And so we saw the right throw out these, it went from news or comedy to commentary to all-out attacks on people. Then cancel culture came back. It's all a bad stream of things happening. In any event, how do we remember Rush Limbaugh? As someone who is on your screen right now, or you're listening to right now, I have admiration for his unbelievable success, his ability to grow and reach the masses. As a human, the fact that he didn't take that opportunity to be a voice of reason and intelligence, he could have still been funny. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about the show South Park. I don't know if you've ever watched the show South Park. It's been around for maybe 20 years now. And it is one of the funniest shows on TV. It will attack everyone, often viciously. But there's some truth to everything they kind of say. They're not anti anything, but they're taking stances and making fun of either political correctness or Trump, or they go after both sides. There's a way to be funny and take on topical, intelligent topics without just being nasty. And too often, Rush Limbaugh was flat out nasty. Those jokes were nasty. Those statements were nasty. And he fed on that. And so the question is, I believe he spoke to people early on. I believe early on there were conservatives that didn't have a place to go to hear thoughts and ideas that replicated their own. As time went on, though, I think he was, maybe him, Newt Gingrich, then obviously the rise of Fox, very much responsible for adding in the nastiness. For saying, okay, you're all listening to me. I have these millions of people that listen to me. You get so much information from me. And now it's okay to go over this limit now. If you disagree with someone politically, it's okay to call them awful, awful things that go well beyond the ideology or the beliefs of someone or their actions politically. That it's okay to make fun of someone's race and call them racial names. And it became normal To the point that I think in normal everyday conversation, we would never say half the things Rush Limbaugh said. But as soon as you left that conversation and jumped in your car and put the radio on, you heard those things as a normal part of conversation. If every day I came on at 4 o'clock and the same people came on every day and we talked, and let's say 90% of what I said was logical and intelligent and amazing and informative and you loved it, but the other 10% was slowly going into racism. Slowly racist, slowly sexist, throwing some comments in there. Nothing over the top at first. Just throw a few comments in there. And then a month later, go a little bit further. And a month later, go a little bit further. It normalizes absurdity. And Rush Limbaugh didn't do that overnight. He did that over decades. The same audience, growing old with him, from conservative talk radio to conservative comedy to nasty. Now, both sides can get nasty. You know, when I first moved to Brantford, I joined the Democratic Town Committee and I went to a fundraiser every year. One is the Jefferson Jackson dinner. One, I forgot what they're called. The Republicans have one, Democrats have one. I went to the Democratic one in the Hartford Convention Center. I was at the table with Uncle Ross and a few other Democrats at the time. And so I was very much a Democrat for ideological reasons. I believed in certain things. Had worked on Obama's campaign, things, military spending, more progressive income tax, distribution of wealth. All of those things I was passionate about. So I was going to this fundraiser thinking that, all right, we'll have a real talk about policy. Two things struck me at this fundraiser. One, I think I paid $150 for the worst chicken on the planet. And I remember the person next to me saying, it's a fundraiser, what do you expect? It was just like not edible chicken. It was terrible. The second one was, all they did was make fun of Republicans. There was nothing about substance. There was nothing informative. It was just jokes about Republicans. The same people that I saw, in front of cameras earlier, talking about the need to work together and the need to respect different opinions and the need to come together and share ideas. We're now on stage cracking jokes about how stupid Republicans were and how backwoods Republicans were and how terrible Republicans were. And then you go on anything Republican, like Rush Limbaugh, and he spent 90% of his time saying, Obama was a disgusting human being, and every Democrat's a disgusting human being, and Pelosi's a disgusting human being, and everything that is social services or social safety net disgusting and awful and racist and terrible. And it was just constant jokes that weren't necessarily funny about the other side. And his guests and the people he talked to and his biggest advocates would be loving that while getting in front of a camera saying we need to work together. And we can't bring the other side. We got to be on the same page, and there's things we have common ground, and we need to come together as a country. That's the bullshit and the hypocrisy of politics. And Rush Limbaugh said, I'm going to make money doing this. And he made millions doing that. And there's an audience that said, I want to hear it. And there's an audience that says, I want to hear it from both sides. The question wasn't just how nasty he was. He was certainly nasty. There's no question. Even his supporters know how nasty he was. Knows the racist things, the sexist things, the awful things he did. But underlying, once you take that away, this idea that you can spread false information by being funny, by being entertaining, is absolutely the crux of everything we see today. It's what MSNBC is. It's what The Daily Show is. It's what Fox News is. Sean Hannity isn't trying to inform you. He's trying to entertain you. Rachel Maddow comes across as intelligent and smart, but it's true, but she's entertaining you. The right probably makes up more things. I'll agree to that. Know what the left does? The left only focuses on things that make the right look bad. So they'll take an entire half-hour show and devote it to one thing. The Republicans did 8 things right today and 1 thing's wrong, and the entire show is about that one thing wrong. So their audience is only hearing negative about the opposition. Because we're not for anything anymore. We're against the other side. And Rush Limbaugh knew that. There was entertainment and money to be made by trashing the other side. Pick a side, trash the other side. So how do we change that? And there's discussions about bringing back the fairness doctrine. It'll never happen. There's discussions about bringing that back. But that's Rush's passing today. I talk about him like I'm in the first. I've never met Rush Limbaugh. But his passing today made me start thinking about that. What did he start? This is the guy who started it. This is the guy that showed you pushing one side really hard, demonizing the other side, and then going over the top makes you money, gets an audience, is entertainment. You know, during the financial crisis in 2008, the question was, should investment banks also be in the business of buying and selling stocks or what have you? That question of whether, banking and finance should be intertwined. The question here is, should politics, political news, and political discussion analysis be intertwined? Should that exist? And the problem is if you gave people a choice between here are the facts, both sides, and here's entertainment, they'll take the entertainment 100% of the time. There's no money in the facts. There's no money in just presenting here's what happened. Because if there was money in presenting here's what happened, there'd be money producing police reports. Police reports are, I went here, here's what happened. But instead, we take those police reports, we rewrite them, we make them entertaining, we put headlines on there to get as many clicks as we possibly can, and then we put them out. Because the actual news doesn't matter, because the actual news doesn't make anybody money. That's why they're called shows. You know what? They're all called shows now. The problem isn't that they're called shows. They're telling you they're entertainment. They're telling you they're meant to be funny. They're telling you they're meant to engage you, not necessarily inform you. But that's what we go for. If we can get our show from Jon Stewart, who's going on, and even his replacement's just as bad. And I'm a Jon Stewart fan, by the way. But I acknowledge that there's so many things he did, so many jokes, especially at Republican expense, that were inaccurate and based on an underlying falsehood, or certainly only a fraction of the full story. That's what Rush Limbaugh started. He started by giving conservatives a place to go, by talking general conservative stuff in an entertaining way. But he grew his audience by being outrageous, by being over the top, making racist, often disgusting statements. And every time he did, the audience grew. So what is that legacy? How do you change it? I'm asking. What do you do now to get us back to a point where people start saying, I want more research. I want to look at more facts. I want to look at people who are reasonable and logical. If you're watching me now, I hope you're watching me because you feel I'm reasonable and logical. But our podcast our reach every day is 800 to 1,200 total views. And that's how many people view it, not the whole time. So is there an audience for that? Is there a large number of people who would tune in to whoever the next Rush Limbaugh will be on a national level, who talks about let's be reasonable and logical? Or is it human nature to want to be entertained? I want to go for the loudest, most obnoxious guy in the room. That's been my reflection today. Because it's a big day. So much of what you see now, so much of Fox News, MSNBC, so much of those things are based on what Rush Limbaugh started. He changed the game. Absolute game changer. No matter what he's ever said, no matter how bad some of the things he said, that's why he's in the Radio Hall of Fame. Presidential Medal of Freedom, I'm not so sure about that. That's a little crazy. I don't think he improved discourse by any means, but he certainly changed it. And he was the forefather of almost everything we see today. And Even more so when we think of he was one of the first ones to actually be simulcast. He had a radio show, and for a couple years, for me, I always watched Mike and the Mad Dog when they were on. And yes, they talk sports in New York, so I watched them in the afternoons. But Rush Limbaugh was on all the time as well. Even more, growing that audience. If for a short amount of time, he was on ESPN. He got in trouble on ESPN, interesting enough, for making a statement that was probably somewhat true. He said basically that Donovan McNabb, who was a black quarterback for the Eagles, there were very few black quarterbacks in the NFL, was basically a product of the media who were looking to see if a black quarterback can have success. Kind of happened with Tiger Woods as well. It was against the grain, right? A golfer being black. He said it in such a way that it was ridiculous. And sometimes that's what he tried to do. The media did not create Donovan McNabb. McNabb is not nearly as good as people think he was anyway. But yes, he was on Monday Night Football. McNabb was overrated, and he got more credit because of his race. Not because, it's hard to say this the right way, because in an industry that was 99% white quarterbacks, you had one black quarterback, and he stood out. So he got more attention for that. Most quarterbacks were white, most linebackers, whatever, were black or whatever. And so he got in trouble for that statement. He was quickly off ESPN, never belonged there anyway. That was like putting Dennis Miller on Monday Night Football, which is just crazy. In any event, that was my day. Rush Limbaugh passing away is a big deal, whether you're a fan or not. He will forever impact all of the news you take in. He will forever impact the Fox News and the MSNBCs because it was realized the money isn't in news. The money is in entertainment. And that people will gravitate to a place where they will get their news. Important information. Politics, healthcare, international affairs, military, all important topics. They will get it from someone who is funny and engaging, whether they're accurate or not. And if you can figure out how to fix that, I'm all ears. Okay, I'll be back. Today is Wednesday. We will be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Thank you for joining me. And we will, there's a few questions I want to get to. Tomorrow we'll get to those. If you have questions, you want to send them in, go ahead. Send any questions you have in probably before noon so I could do some research, make some calls if I need to get some information. But I hope you all have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.